I figure I'll do a live on YouTube. It's, what time is it? So it's 14. And I spent a lot of the day yesterday trying to explain to this funeral home that they're making a mistake. My sibling, my half sibling, who had paid for an adult adoption, she paid for my father to do an adoption of her so she could take his last name and have other rights. Well, I don't know if I should just try to start from the beginning. I don't think I have enough time to tell the whole story. Right now, my father, Robert E. Reagan's body is sitting at a funeral home called Oakey's Funeral Home, and it's in Roanoke, Virginia. And my father's body has been there for a year. And the funeral home guy has not reported that. He's literally just let my Vietnam veteran father, who earned a Purple Heart, sit in storage for a year. I'm not kidding. Roanoke, Virginia, Okies. My half-sister came to Florida, and she told the police that I was crazy. She took advantage of the fact that my mom had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and we were going through the process of getting her medication and everything set up. And my sister came here. So wait, my dad was diagnosed with operable aneurysms November 2023. He was like 80, and he was diagnosed by the VA. My father was a 90% disabled, 70% pay VA veteran. He did several tours in Asia for the United States government. And then my mother enjoyed a 30-year career with the United States Customs Service, which started doing counter narcotics in Puerto Rico, where I grew up. Anyways, those are my family members. And I have been here in Florida taking care of the elders since really 2020 was when it got, my grandma had a stroke right before the pandemic, and her dementia got really bad. And so was my mom with my dad and my grandma. By 2020, my father had started having mental problems. He thought that there was hackers chasing him around, and he was having trouble getting to the doctor, and he kept losing his password for his bank account. So instead of like the normal way we figure it out with the phone or calling, he would like drive 23 miles to the nearest Navy Federal Credit Union to go tell them that he didn't have his password. So this is, anyway, so my dad was showing signs of cognitive decline from 2020. My grandma was sick. I was the only family member dealing with this. None of my cousins, my half-siblings, no one came here. It was me and my mom with my dad, who had essentially already become a dementia patient by 2020. He was having paranoid delusions. He was starting to get lost. His brain fog was getting worse. His CRS is what he called it. Can't remember shit. That's what my dad used to call it. Anyway, so it got really bad. So fast forward November 2023, my father gets diagnosed with these two operable aneurysms, and they schedule him for surgery February 2024. My dad starts losing his mind because my mom, she's struggling with her own illnesses, and my dad becomes hostile. He starts screaming at us. He always had anger management issues. I have personnel files from his tours in Vietnam where they talk about Reagan's anger management issues and how he's a great soldier, but he has anger management problems. And my mom and my sisters and I had to deal with dad's anger management issues our whole lives. Anyways, flash forward, he gets dementia. It gets way worse. So then, nice story. Hey, Kirk, maybe we should kick you out. So dad's body is in Virginia, and January, my mom was hospitalized 2 times, and I was left to fend for myself. None of my sisters came. We did call one of my sisters and tell her, that we needed help and this and that. And her answer was for my mom to leave the state and abandon my father with me. So my mom didn't do that. And I spent probably 20 hours in February 2024 on the phone with every single VA health phone number I could call. And I called the Veterans Affairs Association, and I explained that I was my father's emergency contact and that he was suffering mental health problems based on his exposure high to Agent Orange in the military. The VA refused to acknowledge anything that was happening with my father. They told me that my dad had to volunteer for treatment, or they could not do anything. So I explained to them that my father was resistant to treatment, that we had gone to the clinic in person with my mom. We had explained to them that my father did not want treatment. And they told us that unless the veteran asks for the mental health support himself, that they cannot. Where is my father now? My father's body has been sitting at Oakey's funeral home in Roanoke, Virginia for over a year, where Mr. Larry Joines has not reported the issues with the interment of my father's body, where my half-sister, Sharon Lee Reagan Diaz, who works for the FBI, who made a lawsuit against the FBI asking for a 2-hour workday. My half-sister abducted my father. She came to Florida. She convinced the authorities that she was the rightful person. She convinced the authorities to usurp my mother's authority in her own marriage. And they took my father away. And then he stayed at a place down the street when there was a restraining order. So it's a long story, guys. Okay, so like my dad had dementia. I called the VA in February 2024. I spent over 20 hours of my personal time on the phone trying to get the Veterans Affairs Association of the United States to recognize that my father, a naval veteran of 20-something years of the Navy, I think it was 23 officially that he retired with. Anyways, he was an E7, he was a CB, he had a Purple Heart and many awards and commendations for his service in Vietnam. And my dad had lost the plot. We tried to get him help. By March 2024, I'm also self-employed and a single parent, and I do all of it by myself. So I was here with the elders. My family wasn't here. No one wanted to help. My grandma had died by 2020. My grandma got sick in 2020. She got dementia. Then by 2022, she was dead. My dad's mental health problems started a long time ago, but in 2020, once my grandma had the dementia and my mom started getting ill, then my dad's condition got a lot worse. So February, I'm calling the VA. By March, end of March, my father is arrested. So I was trying to get my father to go to his doctor's appointments. He refused to go to the doctor. He kept making appointments and canceling them. He kept making appointments and telling us he was going, and then he would have me here with my mom caring for her and not paying me, and then I wouldn't be able to go do my jobs. I clean houses, I do pet sitting, I'm a certified personal trainer and yoga instructor. So in March, the local police arrested my father. We had a lady helping me with mom because mom's body wasn't working very well after she was hospitalized a few times, and we had to do rehab with her for her to get better. So I was in the process of taking care of mom. We have this issue with dad. No one wants to help dad. Dad doesn't want to get help. Dad wants to blame everyone else for his problems. So then in March, the Astatula Police Department, it's a long story, so, oh my God. So I start freaking out because I don't know what's going on. I'm in this house with the elders. My dad is now limiting my ability to work. He's very demeaning. He's being abusive to my daughter. He's being abusive to his wife, my mom. His anger management issues are out of control. Every day was horrible. My dad was so hard to deal with. So I told my mom that I really needed to see the estate planning documents that they had drawn up in 2023. And this was 2024. Because my mom had mentioned that, like, I had power of attorney or this, that, the other. So I was like, look, I need to see what you guys put in the estate planning documents. So they showed me the documents. And because I had cared for my grandmother and I'd helped care for my dad, and I'm here caring for my mom, they left me this property. I've been here for 10 years taking care of elders and managing a different case, which is way harder and worse than what they did to my dad here. So Dad gets arrested at the end of March. We had gone to the estate attorney, and they told me that I had power of attorney and this, that, the other. We had contacted lawyers. We had contacted family members. We'd contacted family members, and no one wanted to help. And one of my sisters just wanted to separate my parents. So the day that we went to talk to the attorney, my dad actually followed us to the probate lawyer's office, he's not even a probate attorney. He draws up paperwork primarily. He doesn't really go to court from my understanding. So when we got back home, my mom and I were looking for the originals, which my dad had hidden. And there was a situation where my dad, he hid the estate planning documents. And I told him that, like, those were my mother's documents and she needed them. And so he played this game where he, like, took them out of one place and he put them in another. And I left the room and I come right back in there and I see him, like, over his dresser, and he's, like, pulling the documents out. And I'm like, hey, look, like, we really need to see the documents. So then, you know, we get to the front door. I'm trying to grab the documents. He's trying to take them away from me. He puts them behind his back. He's really big. He's like 6'2". Grand Rising. Hey, Bobby. So I reach around him to grab the file folder, and he grabs my arm and he tries to bite me with his dentures. He tries to bite me. And I was like, oh my God, are you for real? My father in the jail. My father was in jail. Yes, they put my elderly, demented father in jail. Yeah, so what happened was we had this situation with the documents, and he tried to bite me. I grabbed the folder, and I turned around. Like, I went like this, and then his arm came loose from my arm, and I ran out the door and I hid the documents. Then I called the police, and this was like the third or fourth time that we had called the police, because we called the Veterans Affairs Association to try to get my father medical assistance, and they told us they couldn't help. They can't help sick veterans unless the veteran volunteers for help. So it doesn't matter if the veteran has a condition that's hard to treat or where the patient denies treatment, like dementia. They don't care. They told us that if we felt unsafe that we should call law enforcement. And like I told the VA that my father is not a criminal. My father is a well-decorated war veteran who went through Vietnam, and he was exposed to Agent Orange and poisoned by our own government. He is not a criminal. He's sick. The VA didn't care. They told me that if I had an issue, that law enforcement were the ones that had to deal with it. So when we had the issue with the estate documents where I was trying to figure out my responsibilities and obligations with my parents' estate, my dad tried to buy me. So anyways, the VA had told us that anytime there was an incident, right? Dude, this real Coco Melon guy, like, you're a little bit out of it. So, like, if you don't stop commenting with your real weird comments, like, I'm just gonna block you. Anyways, so I call the police and I explain the situation to her. She gives my dad a bunch of legal advice. I have the body cam footage. And she doesn't recognize that my dad's out of it. And they tell us, I tell her, that I don't want my dad arrested, that my dad is sick and he has medical problems, and that it's March and he was supposed to have surgery for these operable aneurysms in February, but he kept not going to the appointments and creating problems for us here in our home, for myself, my elderly mother, his wife, and my daughter, who is a minor. So the officer leaves after she takes all the information. I told her I wasn't going to press charges because my father is sick. I've been telling everyone. Now it's March. I started telling the VA. My mom and I went to the VA in 2022 to tell them that my dad was losing it, and they didn't care. They did not care. We went in person to the office in Tavares, Florida, right? And they did not listen to us. We explained that he has symptoms of mental health problems. He has symptoms of dementia. He was exposed to Agent Orange. He's had many surgeries. He was starting to lose it. He was 81, Agent Orange survivor, Vietnam vet. So then that day that we had the kerfuffle with the estate planning documents, the only option that the officer gave me was to have him arrested. And I explained to this lady, Lejeunesse, whose name is now conveniently Mac. She still works for the same police department. She tells me that, like, there's no grounds. So after she left, my friend who's caregiving for my mom, this nice lady who happens to have a degree in psychology and a master's in abnormal behaviors. Anyways, so I had hired this lady to help with my mom's like physical needs and like with stuff around my mom's room and whatnot. So the day the document issue occurred, when the caregiver got to the house, I called the cop lady that had come, and I said, look, I said, my dad is really sick, and I think he needs a Baker Act. A Baker Act in the state of Florida is like when you think someone is going to injure themselves or other people, and they're put on I think it's a 72-hour or 48-hour mental health hold, and then they can obtain some sort of evaluation where the court determines, like their capacity. So she told me that she hadn't seen any signs, even though this was like the third or fourth phone call, and like we had shown paramedics and cops in that last month. We had shown them that my dad was not well, that he was sick, that he was missing medical appointments, and no one listened to us. So then at the end of March, I think it was like the 20-something, this cop tells me that there's no grounds to put my dad on a mental health hold. Okay, cool. So my dad had left, and I went to work, and this lady looked after my mom. That's Tom. So anyways, Tom, come on, man. Sorry about that. So he's trying to like get on my lap. You want to get on my lap or you want to be stupid? So I get home in the afternoon. We have the kerfuffle with the documents in the morning. The cop comes. I tell her that my dad is not a criminal. I tell her that my dad shouldn't be arrested. I tell her that my dad has dementia. I tell her that my dad is a Vietnam veteran and he's struggling with mental health problems due to his exposure to Agent Orange. And I mean, he was getting old. He had dementia of some kind, Alzheimer's. And he was refusing treatment. So I get home in the afternoon. I go in the house, and the lady that was taking care of my mom, she took our dog out for a walk. So my mom and my child, my daughter, and I are in the house doing what we do. And this lady is walking the dog around the property. My dad gets home and parks in front of our barn, which is unusual. He usually parked near the house. So he parks in front of the barn, and the lady said that she was coming around the barn and that when she saw my dad, she saw his gun. She saw his gun hanging off his hip, which my dad always used to carry, but my dad always carried concealed, very concealed. So it was extremely unusual to see him with a gun hanging out his pocket, which is legal in the state of Florida. You are completely allowed to open carry on your private property. So it's not illegal, but for my dad it was unusual to be open carrying it. So then I don't really know exactly what happened because I wasn't the person who witnessed the situation. What I know is that she came to the door and she was pale. She looked like all the color had come off her face. And I said, "What's wrong? Like, you look like something's wrong." And she said, "Well, your dad's outside and he has a gun and he said that he was gonna shoot you, that he was gonna take care of you." And I was like, "Oh shit." So I was like, "That's not good." I was like, "So why don't we like lock the doors and close all the curtains and we call the police?" So we call the cops. The cops show up. The lady who declined the Baker Act, Officer Lejournaise, who's now called Officer Mac, conveniently she got to change her name, right? So no one knows that she's the same lady that came in here and stole guns out of a safe without a warrant. That comes later in the story. So then the cops come, and it's this older guy who obviously has a lot of experience in the police department. Just the way he talks to people and the way he like investigates, you can tell he has experience. And this young lady that had told me earlier in the day that she doesn't think that my dad is sick, even though like we have evidence that he was extremely sick, actually extremely ill, and we were ignored. So they come and they have a talk with me and with the lady that my dad showed the gun to and told her he was gonna. So my dad wanted to murder me because I wanted him to go get medical attention. But the reality is that my dad was suffering from paranoid delusions and he thought that I was like some hacker hacking into his devices. He didn't talk about that publicly because people would think he's crazy. But for over 2 years, he talked to myself and my mom about the hackers and went back and forth to the bank over and over because he kept losing his passwords, but he was just losing capacity. So the cops are talking to us. They determined that there is probable cause for an arrest, that someone has committed a crime of threatening bodily harm and showing a firearm. So they decide that my dad should be arrested. I told them that my father should be Baker acted, that my father is sick and he should be put on a mental health hold. I wrote it on the arrest report. I wrote that my dad is sick. I wrote it. But they told me that the only way to do anything about my father would be to press charges, which is not true. He was an elderly veteran and they should have put him on a mental health hold. So they drag my elderly, demented Vietnam veteran, Agent Orange surviving dad. They drag him to the county lockup and they throw him in there. And then the next day, they do 4 hours of investigating where myself, my mother, my daughter, and the caregiver are sat down in my mom's room and we are repeatedly interrogated. There are 4 to 5 police officers in and out of our home. They brought elder affairs. They brought child protective services. They came in our house. They looked all around our house. They took pictures. They interviewed us. And at that point, I told the lady from DCF that I had reported her agency to the FBI for an unrelated case to some other really unlawful, fucked up shit they did in a different case. So I'm not going to talk about that other case right now. However, I informed the DCF lady that I had reported their agency for inconsistencies in a different case and evidence that I had that some of their people had fabricated evidence and done other unlawful things in their agency. So she was a little sassy and she seemed determined to paint me as the liar. So they came here and they did 4 hours of investigation. The day after my father was arrested, we went and picked up my father's car, which was also my mother's car, which was impounded. That cost us $500. My dad was at the county lockup. I called the county lockup. I made sure he was okay. I made sure he was taking his meds. They told me he was fine. I went to an attorney for my father. I went and got a consultation at one of the most high-powered criminal defense lawyers locally to see what we could do about this charge that my dad just got because the cops didn't want to put him on a mental health hold. So now we're in April. So here's where it gets spicy. They arrest my dad, and then instead of doing a mental health evaluation on the disabled Agent Orange exposed veteran, they make him go through a criminal trial. They call my sister, Sharon Acevedo, Sharon Diaz, Sharon Lee Reagan Diaz, my sister, who paid for an adult adoption so my biological father would adopt her after she was like 40-something years old. Because she told her she wanted to use the Reagan name in Washington, D.C. or whatever. Because she works for the FBI. Anyways, they called her. And then she decided that she was going to do whatever she wanted. And she got the disabled elder, her stepfather, that she's only spent 8 years of her life with. And she took my father out of our custody with no civil process. She took my dad out of jail. She took him to the bank. She separated their finances. She took him to Geico. She walked into the Geico office in person, canceled the insurance policy, leaving me uninsured on my mother's car that we had agreed that I would get rid of my car and only drive my mom's car because my mom didn't drive anymore. But my sister, you want a heart? Oh, hi. So my sister, she took possession of my dad, and that was in April 2024. And she drove him to a little fish camp down the street, and she helped him get an apartment. And I know that because I've talked to the owner of the place. The place is Lake Harris Lodge, and that is where my father lived, abandoned. There are witnesses. My father destroyed the cabin. He told the owner that he was going to help because my dad used to do construction. And he destroyed their cabin. He kept helping, but then he couldn't fix things. And the owner told me that one day he walked in and there was no lights in the cabin, and my dad had run extension cords like all over the cabin, and the guy was like, "Oh shit, like sir, like this is not safe. I need to I unfortunately this dwelling is no longer safe and I cannot rent to you because there's laws about like you can't if you're renting to someone, you can't have, dangerous issues in the home like faulty electrical work, which is what my dad had created." This whole time that my father was abandoned at Lake Harris Lodge, my mother and I were not able to talk to him because my sister had paid for a lawyer and there was an automatic restraining order. So my elderly, demented father was arrested, and then his ability to speak to his wife, my mother, and myself, his caregivers of I've been near my parents for the last 15 years on and off, like in the area, and my siblings barely come to visit. They barely help with anything. So my dad was stripped of the people who had supported him and been around him and the people who were advocating for him to get the medical treatment that he needed. And no one listened to us. Then my sister came down here and she told everyone a bunch of stories. She told them I was a crackhead. She told my family I hadn't paid the mortgage. She told the family and the police that I had stolen my mom's car. She had basically convinced everyone that I was homeless in my mom's house and stealing all my family's money, and that I was somehow a horrible person, even though I've been here with the elders for 10 years. And my sisters have barely put any input into the situation in the last 10 years, and I was left here with the elders. So my sister effectively slandered me to the local police department who had just arrested my father. She essentially convinced the police that I had done something so intense that my dad decided to tell my mom's caregiver that he was going to shoot me. So then my sister, who works for the FBI, abandoned my elderly, demented Vietnam veteran surviving father here at Lake Harris Lodge, and she took his money. He got a $10,000 loan. They hired a high-powered criminal defense attorney, and they followed through with the court case, keeping my dad separate from us. My dad kept coming to the house violating the no contact order because he wanted to communicate with his wife. No one gave my dad a mental health evaluation. The court bypassed the mental health evaluation and forced the elder to go through a criminal court process. I don't know how much my father's lawyer cost. Since March 2024, my mom has no idea what happened to my father's VA funds, which we have reported to different VA agencies. In December of 2024, my father showed up to the VA hospital in Lake Nona with a rib contusion. He had been abandoned. There was no one taking care of him. There was no one helping him. After he destroyed the cabin at Lake Harris Lodge, the owner called my sister and she said that she didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it. And she left my elderly, disabled father, now homeless, that she had power of attorney for. She didn't contact me or my mother or my father's lawyer. My dad ended up living in motels. And then in January, I had got a dash cam because they said that they wouldn't take my word for my father violating the no contact order. So I got a dash cam and I got him on film violating the order. And then I had to write an affidavit. So I wrote a 10-page affidavit to the probation office. And then they arrested him again. And then they deemed him not competent to stand trial. and they wouldn't give my mom or I any details of his mental health evaluation. So then in January 2025, my father is taken. My father was given to an estranged relative through a criminal court case. There was no family law proceeding. My sister took custody of the vulnerable elder away from his wife, and she took all of my mother's rights, her own mother's rights, away from her marriage. She has not informed my mom of any of what happens with my father's VA money, his nothing, his affairs, nothing. She coerced the criminal court judge to sign an order for the order, which I have, which I've posted on my Facebook. I'm Kellyanne Reagan. I documented this on Facebook a lot. But anyways, the criminal court judge wrote an order that essentially gave my sister custody of dad and the car. Now, the car was duly titled in the state of Florida, and when you have a duly titled car, you're supposed to go through a civil process to take it from one of the owners. They did not go through a civil process. They literally let my sister steal my mother's car when my dad was incapable of driving it, a car that she took to Virginia and she later defaulted on. And the bank wants $28,000 for a vehicle that a criminal court judge gave to my sister through a criminal court proceeding where the car was unrelated. So the courts stole a vehicle from my mom, which my sister took to Virginia and defaulted on. Don't worry, we've reported to a bunch of people, but this is just insane. So anyway, so my sister takes my dad, January 2025. She dumps him at a DC VA hospital. She doesn't even give them the health history, and I get called by a nurse who tells me that my dad is at their hospital and they don't have any health history, and that my sister had just dumped my elderly dad at a VA facility in Washington, D.C., where they determined that he was completely unable to function, and they said that he had to go to a memory care facility, which is what I've been telling everyone since before he was diagnosed with the aneurysms. Again, my mother and I went to the VA in 2022 to tell them that my dad was losing capacity, and we have evidence that like my mom was paying all the bills because my dad had stopped even being able to pay his bills. We had got to the point where we were going to report him to the DMV because he was driving, and like we didn't even want to get in the car with him. It wasn't safe anymore. So then my dad was put in a memory care facility, and all the details of my dad's information were obfuscated from my mom who's still here, who's been conscious throughout this whole thing happening. And she hid my dad, and then my dad died in Roanoke, Virginia, and 4 days after his death, my half-sister in Guam communicated with us and told us that he had died. So my half-sister, who took my biological father from us, has never informed her mother of her husband's passing. She has never informed my mother of what happened to his money after March 2024. And she has gone to the courts and misrepresented the facts in the state of Florida, and now she's in the state of Virginia trying to take possession of my father's body. I spent a long time yesterday trying to talk to the funeral home. The director has apparently made up his mind. They know my sister by first name, and they have decided that they're going to let a judge decide if this estranged relative can sign before any of the blood relatives, and he has not reported to the Virginia authorities that there is someone trying to cremate a body who does not have authority to do so. And he thinks that I tried, but like she filed the paperwork, I think the 9th, right? And then I only received the paperwork on the 11th of July. And so that gives me 9 days to find the right civil lawyer to get this information in front of a judge in Fairfax County, Virginia, when I'm a single self-employed parent who cares for the veteran's wife who has Parkinson's. And I have a whole life, and I have called lawyers in Virginia, and this is a very specific area of law, and it shouldn't even be in court. The funeral home director let my father's body sit there for a year. Larry joins at Oki's funeral service. I asked you, sir, to report what was going on with my dad last summer. My mom is right here. I live in their house. I'm about to feed my mom breakfast. I could have facilitated videos. We have documents. I don't know what you need, but I am Robert E. Reagan's youngest biological daughter and the one who lived with him the longest and the one who's taking care of his spouse. So Mr. Joins over at Okies has not reported the situation with people fighting over my dad's corpse. Hi. So my dad is dead and his body has been sitting at Okies Funeral Home in Roanoke, Virginia for a year. And the funeral home director has not reported this. And I don't really know how that happens. So, like, a funeral director can just let a body sit there for a year and not report anything to the authorities. How is that possible? Oh, God, I'm not tolerating comments like that. Okay, I'm not talking about political issues here. Particularly, I'm talking about my father's body that's sitting at the funeral home in Roanoke, Virginia for a year, and the fact that the funeral home director has not reported that there is a dead person's body sitting at their funeral home, and there is a debate over the person who brought him there not having authorization from the wife, and the funeral home director has not reported that to the authorities, which is his duty. The American economy is not fantastic. I'm not very fond of your comments. Anyways, so this gentleman says that I never gave him the power of attorney documents, so I sent them to him again. And I have evidence that he sent us DocuSign documents. Now, he's upset that we haven't signed the paper. Yeah, I'm upset that you haven't reported, sir. I'm upset that you have not reported that my father's body has been sitting at your funeral home for over a year. Oh my God. Sir, like, I'm not... You're in timeout, bro. I'm putting you in timeout. You're in timeout for a fucking day. Alright, so now I had to email the funeral home with the documents again. And I emailed every email I could find in the funeral home directory. I think it was 3 main emails. They're supposed to be family run, but I think it's highly unusual that you would have a body sitting there for a whole year and that you wouldn't report that to the authorities. I tried to report it. I tried to call Fairfax County and tell them that someone was trying to get rid of a body. And they told me that I had to go to my local jurisdiction to fill in a teletype form so that they could confirm my identity. So the Fairfax County authorities have an operator system on the phone where, unless you're in Fairfax County, apparently you're not allowed to report a crime unless you go to your local jurisdiction and you fill in a teletype and you tell them who they are. So I guess they don't take anonymous tips anymore in law enforcement. I'm not really sure what's going on, but the fact that my dad's body has been sitting at the Okies funeral home in Roanoke, Virginia is insane. for a year now. And I gotta go. I gotta serve breakfast, but I guess I'm just gonna keep doing lives and start documenting this on YouTube about the fact that Robert Everett Reagan's body is still sitting at the funeral home in Roanoke, Virginia. And now my sister is trying to engage in a court process to take control of his remains. And it is completely unlawful and it should be reported. And the funeral home, I'm not sure what you guys are doing, but this is wild. You could have contacted us anytime. I told you that my mom does not answer the phone. I explained that to you. I explained to you that I am her legal representative. I showed you the paperwork. So I'm not really sure, what's going on in this country, but it's pretty wild. My dad served this country for what? Anyways, I'm gonna go, and I hope everyone has a good day.